People have a problem with landlords. They also have a problem with large landowners or property speculators, and the reasons for which change depending on who you ask and what time period you're in. The solutions to these problems with these different groups of people have varied across the time. Number 1, don't do anything. Number 2, the direct way. Number 3, write some strongly worded letters and articles. And number 4, policy change within the current economic framework. Economics is a constantly evolving social science field that shifts often with research and public sentiment, and I wonder why. It's almost like economics is inherently political. But anyway, let's take a look at that fourth approach and see what can be done within the current economic framework. Here, we'll look at a 50s American town. You can tell it's American by the substantial waste of space. And you can tell it's the 50s by the cookie-cutter houses. Let's take a look at one home here. Here, we have a single-family home. The home is made up of two components. For one, the house, and secondly, the land. Periodically, an assessor will come along and rate the value of both the house and the land. And then the town takes those two values, combines them together, and applies a single-rate tax onto the total of the two. Now this makes it fairly easy for the town to do their work, but it presents a few issues, so let's look at two situations. First, here we have John. John owns the house and wants to make an addition to it, as well as add solar panels in order to increase his sustainability. Now John has an issue. When he makes these additions onto his home, it'll increase his property value, and he knows that'll also increase his property taxes. And so by knowing this, he may decide not to go through with it because the opportunity cost is way too high. Now the second scenario, here we have Rose. Rose is John's landlord, and Rose makes passive income by sitting on that land and just collecting rent from John. She does no other job, and Rose also has no incentive to improve the property because she always knows she can charge the market rate for it, and she's always passing on the cost of property taxes onto whoever's renting the house, in this case, John. A potential remedy to these issues is the proposed land value tax, which is also nowadays more often called a split rate tax. What the split rate or land value tax does is it removes that home component of the property and instead just applies a tax onto the land. Now nowadays, this is more often a ratio of one to the other, with a heavier tax rate applied to the land than on the home. This remedy could potentially eliminate many of the issues presented in the first scenario, because now John doesn't have to worry about his property taxes going up when he makes the improvement onto the home. This system would also complicate that second scenario, because the land value tax would increase the amount of property taxes that are applying to Rose as she owns the land, and that would decrease her profit margins on the home, which would make her relatively less wealthy, but John would still pay the same rent because John is currently paying the market rate. These decreases in profit margins would then encourage Rose to use the land to its greatest potential, and so she may decide to make improvements onto the home or may decide to add a second home into that parcel that she owns. So where does that leave us? The land value tax was initially really popularized in the late 1800s, early 1900s, thanks to a book published by the American economist slash political activist Henry George. And it is fairly popular among many different political groups, especially around that time. The ultimate goal of the land value tax is to essentially make the economy more efficient and remove an externality. Now, this tax would take more money away from landlords in the short term, which would decrease their profit margins right now, while theoretically not increasing rents for the average person, because it's assumed that everybody at the moment is already paying the market rate for their current housing. But some research has also shown that long term, the tax could actually increase rents because over time, the landlords could transfer the value of that tax onto the consumer. So that's an argument against the tax. This is a difficult topic. Hey, Jacob here in editing, and I've got a few details to add that I failed to mention but I think are important. So, one point to make when looking at whether to implement this tax is the subtext of the situation. The implication of considering land collective property and allowing government to tax its use is that people may then consider other natural resources as collective property, which was directly acknowledged by many in Henry George's time as the natural course of things. But who knows why this policy was never extensively implemented? It's almost as if the largest actors in our economic system don't like to acknowledge collective ownership or collective action. A second point I only lightly mentioned was the implication that this policy could solve all our housing problems. I'd like to take this moment to say that I'm biased, and this video was made with my own ideology in mind, so many will disagree with some of my assertions. But I don't think this tax would fix much in the housing market, and, assuming it's even implemented effectively, other policies would need to be paired with it. Perhaps locally owned public housing? Although that's communist according to many Americans, so probably won't happen. Alright, let's get back to this overdramatic ending of the video. Maybe I'll put some cool music on the top to spice things up. You know, some people say landlords shouldn't exist. Do you think that? What should we do? Ultimately, it's up to us to figure that all out. To figure out whether we should stick with the current system or transition into another one. You've heard the benefits. You've heard downsides. There's many details that are not covered in this video. But perhaps we can make a change, if that's your vibe. Thank you for watching.
Except the ones who are dead. But there's no sense crying over every mistake. You just keep on trying till you run out of cake, and the science gets done and you make a neat gun.